Welcome to The People Make the Places, Episode 4. All right, we're on our balcony here in Honolulu with friends overlooking Waikiki, and I'd like to know from them, where are your favorite places to go?
The people make the places.
Awesome. In this episode, we're going to continue the trip from Episode 3 in Ireland, going from Cork to Edinburgh, where the group spends a couple more days exploring that area as well as going to Glasgow. Then we're going to shift to the London, England area and combine a couple of trips over quite a few years, including in 2002 when I went with my son Carson and my mother OJ. I had a policy when my kids were growing up that each boy could travel with me to a place of their choice once a year. And that really gave them time with me and time with their mom. I also did my best to include my mother on international trips, and we probably went to 6 or 7 places over the years, which is very precious time in my memory. My friend from childhood, Mark Pighin, was with us on the WayFun trip. Mark was with me when we went to the Dining in the Dark restaurant in London. Another significant trip for me to London was in 2011 when my wife Gena and I went on our third date. I was invited to be a keynote speaker at a TechShare conference in Glasgow. Gena also joined me on that trip. I'll play a little bit of that keynote, but the really interesting part was that we got invited to be mentors for Scottish college students who were doing a hackathon for a couple of days, and we were part of their team to come up with good, accessible products. When I took a taxi from the airport to the hotel, I had this Scottish driver, and it was astounding to me that we were speaking English, but I could not understand what he was saying. There was always about a 15-second lag in my head when I was deciphering his comments. Here's what he sounds like.
Now Mercedes has got into the market, but the Mercedes vehicle's probably another £8,000 dearer. Probably a better car, but when it comes to money, the drivers don't like to spend it, so they go for the Peugeot option.
Before I switch back to finishing the WayFun trip and then to the UK, here's a bit of my keynote to the TechShare conference, because it says a bit about what I think is very important in developing the ability. The better you get around, the better you engage in life.
And then I like, as a person involved in technology, the concept of, is it a bug or a feature? And this really refers to blindness. There are some real benefits to being blind because it forces us to use ingenuity, tenacity, to come up with workarounds that make us good at that. And as we all know, pretty fundamentally, the more you practice at something, the better you get. And how better to address challenges than to have to deal with them all your life or however long you've been blind. It's not really about blindness or vision, but about finding workarounds and using alternative tools and techniques.
And now we'll rewind a few years back to the end of the WayFun Scotland group. These are blog entries that were written at the time, and they're clone voices. So it's my voice and then Dave.
We managed to make the transition from the Killarney guest house to the Cork airport without losing any people or bags. Check-in was a breeze, as was security. The fun came when we lined up to board the flight to Edinburgh, and all of a sudden the gate agents were asking who was blind, how many of us were totally blind, visually impaired, and fully sighted. Jason said that the other low-cost airline, Ryanair, expressly has a limit of 2 disabled people per flight. Air Aaron said they didn't have such a limit. I guess they need the business. However, they decided that their policy manual did not allow 2 blind people to sit together. I tried to convince them that the blind people would lead the way out of the airplane if the cabin was smoky, but they didn't buy this argument. So they delayed the departure as they reassigned us seats. Many of us were inclined to make a stink, but we also wanted to get to Edinburgh. It wasn't as though we would be flying this airline regularly. Paul and Kathy Shelton, both blind, did some quick thinking. Kathy gave her cane to Teresa, who is sighted, in order that Kathy could sit with her husband. This gives me some satisfaction that Air Aaron didn't have the last word on this absurd policy. we figured out a way to sit with whom we wanted. After landing in Edinburgh, we took a train to Kirkcaldy, about a 45-minute trip. We will connect with the Fife Association of the Blind and check out our new home base for the next 4 nights. The logistics of 3 taxis, 1 airplane, and 1 train with all our luggage was taxing on those who had a lot of luggage and those helping out. There isn't a lot of time when a train pulls in or drops off for one to grab bags and get situated. This is made even trickier when it is crowded and you have several blind people trailing. Most of Wednesday was spent traveling, and when people arrived in Kirkcaldy, they were more than ready for a break and some food. A couple of us just made the early train in order to meet with the Fife Society for the Blind at their base in Kirkcaldy. It was interesting to learn about their services in the region, and especially to get restaurant and entertainment tips from locals. Having been on transport all day, we set a pedestrian route and walked the 1.2 miles from the hotel to FSB. We negotiated 2 roundabouts and at least 10 turns out of 14 waypoints. This was through mostly residential areas. We did have a sighted person with us, thankfully, for the roundabout crossing. However, it was strictly up to the GPS and those operating it to direct us to the address on Wilson Avenue. We were pretty pleased to make it. Thursday, September 23rd, Edinburgh, Scotland. Again, we lucked out with the weather up to 60 degrees and sunny, except for one 30-minute period of rain. We took the express train from Kirkcaldy to the Waverley district of Edinburgh, about 20 minutes. We split up and shopped in the area. I was with Ilona and Rich Irwin when a woman came out of a store and said, "Didn't I hear about you this morning on the radio? Aren't you Americans testing a satellite system?" I said we were plus 1 Dutch person. Her name was Julie, and we fell into conversation as we walked along the streets. She told us about the best places to shop, and we told her the names of the streets we were crossing. Julie left us in an indoor mall, and a nice salesperson escorted us around various shops, not just her own, looking for some gift items. It was great meeting and visiting with a couple of Scottish locals. From there, Rich and I managed to get lost for a while in a parking garage before we made our way to our group appointment at the new Parliament building. A member of Scottish Parliament, Kate McLean, hosted us. We got a brief tour and had some discussions about issues for blind people in the UK. From Parliament, we strolled along the Royal Mile toward the Edinburgh Castle. I did several media interviews in person and on the phone, along with a stop for lunch. The castle was very interesting with excellent audio and live guides. My favorite factoid was the biggest cannon shot, a 350-pound boulder up to 1.5 miles. We saw royal jewels, swords, and enjoyed the history and ambiance of the castle. As usual, we ended the evening with a fantastic meal and a desire for bed after a very full day. Friday, September 24th, 2004, Fife, Scotland. On another beautiful day in Kirkcaldy, we set out in several different directions. One group went to the seaside, another to St. Andrews to see the famous golf courses. Others stayed in town, and some of us returned to Edinburgh, where Jason was the subject of articles by the Scotsman and the Edinburgh Evening News. 6 of us took the Majestic City bus tour to get an overview of Edinburgh. It is a fairly cosmopolitan city as compared with Glasgow. We all gathered again in the evening to have dinner in the nearby village of Frenchy. It was really our last night with the entire group, since some folks are flying out of Glasgow and staying there tomorrow night. We took over the restaurant hotel and had traditional Scottish food. Some even had the famous haggis, neeps, and tatties. If you don't think about what haggis is, it isn't so bad. Several folks were game to try these local foods. My favorite accomplishment was that of Margaret Buckingham. She is a very new GPS user. Margaret stayed in Kirkcaldy today and mapped out a route to the local travel agency. She said she plugged in the address and asked for a pedestrian route. There were 15 points in the route. Halfway through the route, her blind husband said, "I don't think this is the right way." They persisted with the route since there wasn't much of a choice. Sure enough, Margaret directed them to the travel agency, her first completely solo route. Cheers to Margaret and to the Fife Society for the Blind for turning us on to a wonderful slice of Scottish culture. Saturday, September 25th, 2004, WayFun Ireland/Scotland last day. Don't be daft, says the football announcer as he argues about the Celtic game with a fan. I wasn't, unfortunately, at this game in Glasgow, but am listening on the radio instead here in my hotel room as I make preparations for our departure back home. Most of our group was, in fact, in Glasgow today. Another batch went into Edinburgh, and I spent most of the day with a film crew who are doing a story about Richard Moore, a man blinded at age 10 by a stray bullet in Belfast. Richard is thinking about having an operation to restore his sight as I did. We were comparing notes about the issues he might face. Like me, Richard agreed that it was the journey that interested him, not that he needed to have vision in order to be a complete person. I am speaking about the journey to explore the meaning of blindness, low vision, and full vision. Richard just flew in from Malawi, where he was visiting one of the divisions of his foundation, Children in Crossfire. He still lives in Derry, Northern Ireland, and he travels the world from Africa to South America on behalf of his foundation. We both expressed gratefulness for the lives we have been fortunate to lead in spite of the accidents that blinded us. How many people in the world have a good job, family, and opportunity to travel like we do? Blind, that is, mice nuts, compared with the plight of children in developing countries facing daily violence, or even people who struggle with alcoholism or are homeless. We wondered what the big deal was about blindness in the face of so many other plights. Here we were, two blind men meeting on the shores of Scotland, one flying in from California and the other from Northern Ireland, arriving from Africa just in time for this meeting. And I'm sure all of the travelers in our group, blind and sighted, are incredibly grateful for the fact that we have the tools, techniques, and wherewithal to be able to vacation in Dublin, Cork, and Fife. In the modern vernacular, how cool is that? You have to draw out the word "that" for the proper sound of this expression. Margaret and Armand reported another successful day on their own, locating Tate's jewelry store on their own, a place where losing pounds isn't hard to do. Margaret was justifiably proud that she and Armand found Rose Street and the jewelry store on their own with the help of the GPS. I am feeling a tinge of sadness as this trip draws to a close, and we didn't have yet one more opportunity to toast as a group and to say goodbye. We have created unforgettable experience and made new friends in our mere 10 days of traveling. Instead of saying goodbye, we said, where are we going next?
Monday, September 27th, 2004. By Dave Jones, Glasgow or Bust. Saturday morning came too quickly. I woke this morning with that sad thought. Betsy and I were unusually quiet as we packed for the last time. I was up earlier than Bets, so I dressed and went downstairs to settle the bill before the desk got too busy. I bumped into Rich Irwin and learned that we had another meeting planned for 9 a.m. in the hotel lounge. We finished packing and headed for the hotel restaurant for breakfast. Several from the group were already seated. As we grabbed a table, Mike came by to tell us he had an appointment at 8:30 a.m. with the documentary film crew. He advised that he wouldn't be able to travel to Glasgow with us that morning. We said our goodbyes, the first of many that day. By 8:50, most of the group had gathered in the restaurant, so we held our meeting there. Then we figured out who was going with us on the train to Glasgow. It turned out that a majority of the group planned to go. Some of us would stay in Glasgow that night, while others would return to Kirkcaldy for their last night. We hugged and said goodbye to Chuck and Teresa, as they would not be joining us in Glasgow. Our train was scheduled to arrive at 9:50, and we all decided to head for the station about 9:30 so we would have enough time for the walk. Betsy and I went back to our room, retrieved our luggage, and made our way down to the lobby to wait for the others. I was ready to go and moved outside in front of the hotel. As I pushed through the door, I heard the loud cries of a seagull. I looked up and spotted him, sitting on the hotel roof. He called out again, and I imagined that he was also saying goodbye. Soon everyone had filtered out of the hotel, and we were ready to go. We had decided to take a shortcut to the station that morning. I was in the lead, so I headed around the side of the building towards the back. As I cleared the rear of the hotel, I noticed an old graveyard just across the street. I had to fight the impulse to drop the bags and go explore the eerie markers that were placed there over the many years. Our time was short, so instead I headed for the shortcut, the secret stairs. The secret stairs was the name Betsy invented for the path that led from the back of the hotel down to the street that ran behind the hotel. This name was quickly adopted by the group, since the path passed through some heavy brush and a green garden setting. It was not easily seen until you stumbled upon it. As we waited on the platform for our train, we learned that Richard R. had caused a car wreck just moments earlier. Apparently, he had been preparing to leave the curb and cross the street, and a car had stopped to let him cross. The car behind failed to notice and bumped into the first car. Reportedly, no one was injured, and we all got a laugh at Richard's expense. The train was on time, and we all rushed to get aboard within the allotted 45 seconds the train stopped. As usual, the luggage was the biggest hurdle, but we finally managed to get it all loaded. I was last aboard the train, and as I stepped in, I noticed the conductor watching us from down the line. He had held the train to make sure we had all made it safely. I smiled and gave him the thumbs-up signal. At this point, there were about 10 of us, and we all grabbed a seat for the 30-minute journey to Edinburgh. Rich and Jason sat across a table from a fellow who noticed Jason's computer and instantly began asking questions. He said he was employed in the IT profession and wanted to know all about the Braille note. Between the two of them, they answered all but the most technical questions. He was on a 6-month paid holiday and was spending the time traveling about Europe. Naturally, he was most impressed with the group and how independent they all were. The train was full of people that Saturday morning, but we arrived at the Haymarket Street station without incident. We again rushed to unload the bags within the allotted time. The route took us to Glasgow through Edinburgh, where we had to switch trains. Unfortunately, we had to get from platform number 4 over to 1. The station had a raised pedestrian crossway to each platform, and there were too many stairs involved. We were forced to pull the luggage up those stairs and then down the other side. This process was a challenge, to say the least. We were pooped by the time we landed on the number 1 platform. The good news was that there was a train to Glasgow scheduled every 10 or 15 minutes, so the wait was not long. About that time, I heard my name called from across the platform. I turned to see 4 more of our group just coming down the stairs. They had been separated from us in Kirkcaldy, and we had not noticed. It was like a happy reunion as they joined us. Now, we had 14 in our party. The Glasgow train arrived and was even fuller than the previous one, but the ride would only take 45 minutes. As we arrived at the Queen Street station, I noticed water trickling down the hill next to the tracks. I wonder if our good luck with the weather had finally run out. This was the end of the line for the train, and we all unloaded a little more leisurely. We had planned to locate a paid locker room for our luggage. This would make our sightseeing and shopping much easier to manage. Instead, we were very fortunate to be assisted by some very friendly station attendants. They offered to store our bags in the locked manager's office until we came back for them later. This was an offer that went way beyond the norm, and we were pleased to accept. As we all moved through the ticket gates and into the main lobby of the station, I had my first look around. This was a huge building, and it was filled with people either just arriving or lining up to board for a different destination. Initially, our group was a bit overwhelmed, and we huddled together to figure out what to do next. I decided that we needed to locate Jason's friend Monty, whom we planned to meet at this station. I grabbed Jason, and we two headed for the Dundas Street exit. Betsy and Val also broke from the group and headed to the tourist board, where they hoped to obtain sightseeing info for Glasgow. Jason and I walked out the exit and into the open air. It was still crowded with people, but I quickly spotted a tall, dark-headed young man moving towards the entrance to the station. I instinctively called out to him, and he stopped to look towards my unfamiliar voice. Jason and Monty were quickly talking, as old friends do when they had not seen each other in a long time. I left those two and went back inside to retrieve the rest of the group. However, we were forced to say another goodbye. Carl and Elaine, Mark, and Ilona had decided to break away. I was surprised by my own brief emotion as I hugged Elaine. I realized that I had formed a bond with all of these people and didn't want them to leave. As we made our way out of the station, I was pleased to note that the rain had stopped and the sun was trying to pop out from behind the clouds. After a few moments of discussion, we decided to follow Monty to the local shopping district. It was only a few blocks over. As we rounded the corner and stepped onto Buchanan Street, I was again amazed at the number of people moving along on the street. I realized that this was a different world than the malls I was used to back home. This street was lined on both sides with individual shops of all kinds. Almost immediately, the girls stopped at Thornton's, which is a chocolate shop. During our travels, this became a favorite stop whenever we were out shopping, and their candies were all very delightful, We made another purchase to make sure we had plenty for our girls back home in KC. Just next door was a tea and coffee shop. This too proved to be very popular, and almost everyone from the group bought something here. As we moved along, we heard a street musician playing a song with his pan flute. We stopped for a moment to enjoy the sounds. Only a few steps further along was a man with an acoustic guitar. More shops and more purchases. Then we noticed a crowd gathering just ahead. As we moved closer, we heard a street band and the booming sound of drums. I had Rich in tow and moved us into the crowd so we could see what was going on. To my surprise, I found a group of 5 men playing traditional Scottish music. There was a large open area in the street, and these guys were playing music and running around and having way too much fun. Each was dressed in a kilt and other traditional garb. The scene was very exciting, and we stayed for a while just to soak up the atmosphere. My stomach was growling, and I noticed it was after 1 o'clock. The group decided that we should try to find a place to stop and eat lunch. Monty said he knew of a good place for our large group, only a short walk away. He led us to the Crystal Palace, a well-known spot in Glasgow. We were led upstairs to a second-floor dining room. The room was very large, and we easily found a couple of tables. The menu had a good variety, and Betsy and I soon settled on fish and chips. Our table had a unique number stamped into the surface, and I was directed to place our order at the bar across the room. This bar ran the length of one side of the room, and I noticed an excellent variety of beers on tap. I placed my order and carried a couple of pints back to the table. The food arrived quickly, and I enjoyed the meal, which included green peas. I learned that this is a very common side dish when serving fish and chips. I also noticed an odd condiment available at the table called brown sauce. My curiosity got the better of me, and I just had to try it. It turned out to taste a lot like the Heinz 57 sauce we use on steak back home. Valorie ordered a chocolate fudge cake with vanilla ice cream for dessert. She shared a taste with us, and it was wonderful. It was tempting to stay here and drink another pint, but the group grew restless and wanted to move on. On the way out, I discovered a small, old-fashioned style lift, elevator. This one even had the double set of black iron gates we have seen in the movies. Several of us had to try it since it was still working. We stopped just outside the restaurant, and I took a picture of the group. Next stop, Woolworths. Inside, we all recalled these stores from childhood many years ago, before they went out of business in the States. Many were dime stores. It was fun to look around to see the deals available. Soon the group was off again. We headed back up the street in the general direction of the station, but we soon discovered that we had left Richard R. back at the store. Luckily, we had a working radio and were able to contact him. I ran back to help him rejoin the group. We walked and shopped some more. It wasn't long before we all needed a break, and Monty knew of a pub that didn't allow smoking. We soon arrived at the Phoenix Tavern, and again found some inviting chairs in the upstairs section. Betsy and I sat with Richard and Janet. They told us about the plans for their daughter's wedding next spring. Paul and Kat and Rich War ordered some Scottish whiskey to sample. Then Richard B.'s cell phone rang, and it was Mike calling. He had just finished up with his film crew and was not going to come over to Glasgow, as originally planned. As Richard held up the phone, we all yelled, "Goodbye and thanks," in unison. Then, we raised our glasses to toast to his friendship and leadership. The time had slipped away. We had all planned to have dinner at a local Indian food restaurant. But Richard R. decided that he was ready to head back to Kirkcaldy, and we all had had enough, so we returned to the station to retrieve our bags. This was the hardest parting time for me. As we took turns hugging and shaking hands, I felt another wave of emotion sweep through me. This was not like me, and I knew I was leaving something special. I was especially sad to part with Richard B. We had shared some great times together and hoisted a few Guinness pints, more commonly known as Black Gold. Jason and Lelena were staying with Monty overnight before taking a train to London. Richard and Janet were headed back home to Edinburgh. As they all walked away, I hoped that we might meet again. The rest of us were taking a Sunday morning flight and had a room reserved near the airport. So, we found the exit and headed over to the bus stop. After waiting for 20 minutes, we all decided to take a taxi instead. A few minutes later, we were headed out in the right direction. Valorie rode with Betsy and I, and our driver was friendly. As we crossed the Clyde River, he proudly told us that both the Queen Elizabeth and the QE2, world-famous ocean liners, were built right down there on the docks. We all arrived at the hotel to find a very busy front desk. Turns out we were fortunate to have made a reservation in advance because the hotel was sold out. To make things simple, we decided to eat in at the hotel restaurant instead of trying to get back out. Now there were only 6 of us left. We sat around the round table and reminisced. Rich I wanted each of us to pick a favorite place. We shared this last meal and then turned in for the night. We planned to meet again to catch the 8:30 shuttle over to the airport. Turns out that Valerie, Paul, Kathy, Betsy, and I were all on the same flight from Glasgow to Chicago. We arranged to switch seats and were able to sit together as we headed for home.
My name is Valorie Stanard. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. And at the time we did the trip to Scotland, I was working for the YMCA, where I later retired.
What are some of the highlights that it brought up in your memory, and some of the people, and maybe some stuff that's not in the podcast that would be interesting for people to hear about?
Well, I remember the crown jewels was kind of a big deal because I remember the part I remember is her taking me into, and maybe there was somebody else too, into a different room, letting me actually touch a lot of the stuff that she had it in this velvet case. She had some of them in there, and I actually got to feel them and pick them up. And I was so scared that I would, off it or something like that. And she was so, so nice. I remember Betsy being like, oh, wow, you got to touch those, which she got to see them, but I didn't get to see the glitter and the glitz. They were a lot different than what I had imagined. The other thing that I remember was that cannon and how big the balls were, the concrete. Well, they felt like concrete, whatever they were, I don't know. But the balls were just ginormous, and how we were talking about, I had never really seen like something that they would, real cannon like that one we saw. I remember the chocolate shop and the lady in there just describing like every single chocolate. And I was almost feeling we were taking up too much of her time. I don't remember who all was standing there while she was going down the whole list and describing in detail. But I'm thinking, you're so kind to us, but I'm sure you that probably don't need to hear this. But they were just so, so kind everywhere. It was amazing how everybody really got along. And I was worried that Dave and Betsy, since they didn't have any other experience with anybody else who was blind except for me, I was really worried that they would not enjoy the trip. It felt like they fit in really well with the rest of us. And even though most of us didn't know each other before we started, there was a bond between us. I just remember the camaraderie that we had. And so it was just so much fun learning about the country and about how other blind people travel and what they do and what machines they use, which that always interests me.
As I mentioned, this is one of the trips that I took my son Carson on in 2002 to London when he was 10 years old. I gave him the tape recorder and let him narrate what he was experiencing.
We'll be leaving to England pretty soon. Now we're at our hotel called Leicester, and it's a nice place. We're at Warwick Castle, and it is just awesome. Right, I'm doing the challenge of picking up swords, and it's pretty difficult to pick up these heavy swords. I'm in the room also where they keep all the weapons. Now I'm in the torture chamber, and there's very weird stuff down here. Now I'm in some weird model place where they have models of the people and speakers. And now I'm going to climb to one of the towers. You go up and up and up. It's very high. This new hotel is very nice. We got a big TV. We went on a boat ride. We had Nintendo. We had ice cream. We had a ton of. We'll be leaving this hotel pretty soon. We just saw the Mona Lisa a little while ago, and it looks really nice. I like its smile, nice frame, a few other nice pictures too over there. It's nice. Lions guarding what tower?
Trafalgar.
This Trafalgar Tower, and we're on a tour on a bus in London.
We're at Piccadilly Square. And the Brits Hotel is right overlooking us.
It was built in 1906.
He's our next stop for the Hard Rock Cafe.
Carson has spotted the umpteenth McDonald's, and each one he wants to stop at. Grosvenor House is the biggest hotel in London. London is an incredible mixture of very, very old buildings and very, very new glass mirrored buildings. Buckingham Palace is straight ahead. 2,000 people are expected to attend the service for the Queen Mother.
It's amazing how many people are just going to this Queen Mother's funeral. There's miles and miles and miles of people in this line. Billions of people. We just saw the grandsons of the Queen Mother. Just went into the funeral. Yeah, I did. It's just awesome. We just saw the coffin through the archway. It's everything in there. You can just see Prince Harry, Prince William, all of them. Oh, it's just amazing. It's just amazing.
It was so fun that we just happened to be passing by Buckingham Palace when all the activity was going on around the Queen Mom's funeral, including seeing Princes Harry and William. You heard a bit of my mother OJ's voice, who was my hero. She passed away in 2007 and was a huge influence and continues to be on my life. We'll come back to Carson a little bit later when he's a bit older. Now to another trip to London when I was with my friend Mark Pighin and we went to a Dining in the Dark restaurant.
So we're in Don La Noire, the dark restaurant in London. We're surrounded by up to 60 people. We're all in an absolutely black, pitch dark room eating our meals. Who knows what we've eaten? We can guess, but it could be something scary. Surrounded by my British friends and colleagues, my American friends, and then just we're all sharing a table. This is a table for 10. Seems to be a younger crowd here by and large, and everybody, as you can hear, is completely fired up. And then we have our waiter, Roberto, who's our Italian waiter. He gives you a 30-second introduction, orientation, and then that's it. You're on your own.
Comment on the plates, too. They're not the typical round plates.
No, these are kind of square plates. They make you remove everything that might possibly present any light into the situation, put it in a locker upstairs so that there's just not a trickle of light in here. And everybody's fired up. The sighted people particularly are louder than they might be in a normal restaurant situation. I think compensating for the fact they can't see each other.
Okay, you done with your mains?
Yes. You want the cutlery this time?
I didn't take my hands off me drinks.
Yeah.
I might lose them or knock them over.
Have you got your food yet? This is pasta, isn't it, Stu? Is it?
It's strange because you don't lose your mouth when you're drinking though, do you?
No.
I've been in other Dining in the Dark restaurants, including one with Gena, and since she's a key part of the People Make the Places where I go, since we travel a lot together, I wanted to tell you a little bit about how we met, connected, and continue to travel together. I knew Gena from the 80s when we skied together, but we only saw each other every so often over the years until I got divorced in 2011. We reconnected when we were both volunteering at the Lighthouse for the Blind camp in the Napa foothills. And that started a number of dates. In fact, we went out twice. And then I told her I was going to London. And she said, "Oh, I'll go with you to London." So on our third date, Gena and I went to London.
The London trip was magical. So a couple things that stood out to me was I had never traveled using so much technology. So Mike had GPS that he was able to access through Braille as well as audio. And I loved hearing all the points of interest around. In that same GPS, we were able to mark special points that are not normally in GPS. So blind people after us could go find those points, such as a boat tour that we took on the Thames. We marked how to get in the line. It was really amazing to travel so independently, two blind people by ourselves, using technology. We came back to the U.S., and pretty much continued to travel together.
And we loved that hop-on-off bus, which we heard in the piece with Carson. And it's such a great way to just experience the city and spend time where you want and otherwise just move on and also get good narration as you go.
The other really neat thing about the trip to London is we saw the play Ghost, and Mike knows the playwright, and we were able to meet the main actress who was super friendly and allowed us to touch all of the set things as well as their costumes. That was so special.
Yeah, Casey Levy, she was amazing. We saw her in New York too in Ghost. Well, fast forward 3 years and Gena and I got married, and I'm going to take you back to the voice of Carson. My son Wyndham and Carson read a couple of things in a poem at our wedding, and very tragically, Carson was killed in an avalanche in 2016. So it's very precious to hear his voice in this piece and continue to make him part of my thinking and my thoughts as we go forward.
We actually got married at the camp where we reconnected.
And now we would like to bring forward, who is standing up for Mike, Wyndham May, 20, a young man of many sports, especially skiing, working and studying forestry, and Carson May, 22, seeker of creativity in film, photography, sound, and more.
The fountains mingle with the river, and the rivers with the ocean.
The winds of heaven mix forever, with a sweet emotion, nothing in the world is single.
All things by a lot of vine, in one another's being mingle. Why not I with thine?
See the mountains kiss high heaven, and the waves clasp one another. Now sister flower would be forgiven if it disdained its brother.
And the sunlight clasps the earth, and the moonbeams kiss the sea. What are all these kissings worth, if thou not kiss me?
So there you have a full range of travels and experiences, people and places from 2002 to 2016. Let this podcast be in memory of Carson May or Eugene May. Some others from the WayFun Scotland trip. I know Carl Simmons is no longer with us. There was also some other people on the WayFun trip, not mentioned in the podcast, Paul and Kathy Shelton, Elaine Simmons. I wanted to mention the city that we stayed in. The clone called it Kirkcaldy, and it's actually called Kirkcaldy. Also, thanks to Derek Lane for putting the polishing touches on this podcast. Future episodes will include Ghana, Bali, Chile, Europe, and skiing. Hope you enjoyed these people in Scotland and England. Please rate and share this podcast. Goodbye for now from Mike, May, and friends.